Welcome to the Health Tech Heroes, where we talk to innovators who are rewriting the DNA of healthcare. Today, we are joined by Dr. Alaina Rajagopal. Alaina is the co-founder and chief medical officer of Esperto Medical, an emergency physician at Kaiser Permanente and visiting associate at Caltech. Her remarkable path weaves through clinical care, pioneering research in space and aerospace medicine, and challenge of delivering diagnostic to world's most remote places from patient homes to the edge of space. Driven by curiosity and resilience, Alaina channels her experience from ER, NASA labs, beyond in bold solutions from some healthcare's toughest problems. We are excited to unpack her origin story, Esperto Medical's vision, and her hard-won wisdom of those shaping the future of care. Welcome to Health Tech Heroes, Alaina.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
It's fascinating that you have achieved so much, so let's jump right into your origin story. Alaina, can you take us back to the moment you realized you were called to medicine and science? Was there a personal experience or defining challenge that set you on this extraordinary path?
I don't think it was one experience, but probably a series of different experiences over time. I was always a very curious kid. I was interested in a lot of different things. And I guess the first time I thought about medicine was actually after I saw an episode of ER at my grandma's house. I kind of thought, that looks like a really cool career. But I also was really interested in dinosaurs and paleontology and spaceflight. So it was just kind of one of many things. And then when I was in college, I studied abroad in Nairobi, Kenya, and I worked in an HIV clinic outside the city. And so I was there kind of taking patients' vital signs when they first came to the clinic and just kind of assisting with whatever the clinic needed. And it was in that environment that I really started thinking about medicine, and that as a volunteer at the clinic, I felt like I was helping, but I couldn't really make an impact on some of these patients' lives. I became a physician, then maybe I could actually help these people a little bit more. But again, was still really interested in aerospace and spaceflight and ended up going to graduate school for that. And then it was about halfway through graduate school where I kind of just thought about the research that I was doing and the impact that I was having. And I felt like my research was taking 12 to 18 hours a day. I hadn't seen the sunlight in a few months because I was just in this dark lab all the time. And I really wanted more human interaction. I wanted to have a more direct impact on people's health. And so I also was really curious about how the viruses that I was studying sort of interacted with the rest of the human body. And so that ultimately is what led me to start the application process and then go to medical school right after I finished my PhD.
And what took you specifically to Nairobi at that point of time? And I would imagine that was when you were seeing patients in Nairobi, it was before antiretrovirals treatments.
Antiretroviral treatments were around and readily available, and that was a lot of what we did at the clinic. But to your point, there's a lot of barriers to treatment, particularly for patients who live in really remote or austere environments. And so it was some of those challenges that we kind of grappled with on a daily basis in treating people, where I had one patient in particular that I remember who was a pregnant mom. I think she was 8 or 9 months pregnant when we saw her, diagnosed her with HIV, asked her to come back to the hospital or the clinic or somewhere where she could get better treatment to assist with her delivery. Ultimately, we didn't see her for her delivery, and she came back and brought the infant sort of covered head to toe with a skin rash, and the baby had AIDS. And I remember that as a really formative experience, in that I really started thinking about barriers to care and understanding how challenging it is for women in some of these environments to get the care that they need. And so that was, I guess, another one of the things that directed me on the medical path.
Honestly, I don't know how we get over that, seeing kids suffering that much. And why did you end up in Namibia specifically? And what was the reason for you going to Namibia?
I went to Kalamazoo College, where I think at the time it was 85 to 90% of the student body studies abroad. So basically the entire junior class is gone. And so it's a really interesting college environment. But I decided that I wanted to go and live somewhere that was really different from where I grew up. I didn't want to go to another Western country. I didn't want to go to Europe, though my parents definitely preferred that. But I thought about going to Senegal, but I felt like my French was probably not strong enough because there you speak French about 20 to 30% of the time and then learn Wolof for the rest of the time you're there. And so I felt like with Kenya, there's English that many people speak, and then also Kiswahili is widely spoken. And so I took and learned Kiswahili while I was there, and there was like a little bit less of a language barrier. So I felt like I could kind of integrate a little bit better there than Senegal.
Okay. The first time you said you mentioned Kenya, but I heard it as Namibia, so I'll correct that one.
Nairobi.
Okay.
Nairobi was the
Nairobi.
city.
Beyond this geographical boundaries, your journey has crossed so many other boundaries like emergency medicine, space research, entrepreneurship. What drives you? What is the source of your strength?
Curiosity. I think a lot of the things that I pursue are things that I'm interested in and I want to learn more about. I want to research more. I want to be able to solve problems. And so I think while often it's great because I can have a lot of really interesting and unique experiences, sometimes being very curious also, to your point, you end up doing a lot of different things. And so that can be challenging in a lot of ways. But yeah, I don't think I would change anything. I've really appreciated a lot of the learnings that have come from having such a diversity of experiences.
And you mentioned your parents wanted you to go to some developed countries, Europe or something, for your international studies. But you ended up in Kenya and in Nairobi. What that means is you have to take certain amount of risk, right? You cannot be risk averse to have a career like yours. Working at the edge of what's possible, from helping patients in crisis to reimagining diagnostics for Mars, can be both inspiring and isolating. Can you share a time when you saw the human impact of your work and what that meant to you personally? Like unpack a little bit more on the Mars part, and hopefully we can see like where this impact is, where your vision goes. I would love to hear more about that.
So I think kind of going back to the diversity of experiences, a lot of those things that I've learned have made me have a different perspective when solving problems. And so when I was working in aerospace or at NASA, but I was very interested in global health. And people would often ask me, how can you be interested in health in these remote environments on Earth and also care about spaceflight? It doesn't go together, but in my mind, it actually goes together really well. And they're both environments where it's really difficult to practice medicine. It's difficult to give people the care that they need. So thinking about how we can improve care in both of those environments from a technological perspective actually makes a lot of sense. Like we can use technology to help bridge some of the gaps in access, whether it's at a clinic in Kenya or the top of Mount Everest or the surface of the moon. And so that's kind of what ended up directing me into entrepreneurship, was starting to solve some of those problems and developing medical devices that can, like I said, bridge some of those gaps in access to care.
We take it for granted that we have all these treatments when you're living in a developed area in a developed part of the country. And I'm not even talking about outside United States, just the rural area of United States where simply people cannot simply access healthcare, and it might be available to them, they just can't access it. That's such a huge problem, and it's not even about discovering new technology, and which you are, but it is just giving access to existing technology.
That's a great point. Access to care is a huge problem in the US as well, whether you're in a remote part of the US or whether you're in an urban area where there are so many people that it's difficult to get appointments. Access to care seems to be a problem no matter where you are.
Yep. And the difference could be like 10 miles geographically and a few $1,000s in your income.
Yeah. But 10 miles is a really long way if you have to walk.
And you have to take a few days off or a whole day off from work and go there. It's not something that you stop by on your way to work. And getting a little into Esperto Medical, for listeners new to Esperto Medical, how do you describe the mission and the problems it solves that traditional healthcare can't?
Esperto was founded based on the idea that we wanted to be able to make good medical care more accessible. So it kind of started after I'd been working on a remote island and we didn't have the right diagnostic equipment to help us answer questions. And so I came back and talked to my husband, who's an electrical engineer and a physicist. And I remember specifically saying, I wish I just had a tricorder, which is this sort of magical instrument from Star Trek. You just wave it over a patient and it tells you what's wrong. And his response was, well, why don't we just build one? And so we kind of laughed about that a little bit. But then we really started thinking about the problem seriously. And we thought about ultrasound as a really versatile tool that can be used in a lot of different ways. And as we started thinking about ultrasound for more extensive diagnostic capabilities, we thought about blood pressure. And we thought, oh, it should be pretty easy to measure blood pressure with ultrasound. But as we started looking at the problem, we realized it was a lot more challenging than we'd originally anticipated. And we actually ended up throwing away a couple of methods that we developed because we felt like they just weren't good enough. They required calibration. And as an emergency medicine physician, I don't have time for calibration. If I have to get out another device to calibrate this device, I'm just not going to use it. So we went back to the drawing board, and that ultimately led us to discover resonance sonomanometry, which is a method that uses ultrasound and audio frequency sound to help measure blood pressure continuously. So it was, I would say, sort of a circuitous path to get where we ended up, but it was really meaningful and I think based on real need.
Okay. So now in your team, just between you two, you have a doctor, you have a PhD, you have an electric engineer, and you have a physicist. So you are covering all bases just based on two of you to initially start it. It's a great story and completely purpose driven that you had a pain point and you wanted to solve it.
I think it's a combination of skill sets that really made it possible, and the fact that our skill sets were really complementary. What one of us knows, the other one doesn't, and vice versa. And so with that, we can really solve problems looking at it from different perspectives, which I think, again, really helps coming up with unique solutions.
That's a wonderful story. Can you share a story that captures what a win looks like for Esperto Medical? Something that made you realize that the risk and the hard work was totally worth it.
Well, I think a win for us would be having a clear device that is out there helping people. I think one of the benefits of the technology that we're developing is that it's non-invasive. And so the standard of care right now is to place a catheter directly into somebody's artery. So it takes a needle, and it's a pretty common procedure, but it doesn't come without risks. And so because of that, we don't use it on all patients in the emergency department or all patients getting a surgery or all patients in the ICU. But I think there are a lot of patients that I have that could benefit from that continuous monitoring. And so I think a win would be to really see reduced side effects, reduce problems from invasive lines in patients, and also being able to start to understand how blood pressure changes throughout the day and throughout the year in a wide variety of different patients with different pathologies, because I think that'll ultimately help us prevent disease better in the future.
All right. So you're not just looking at diagnostics at this point. You're also looking at monitoring continuously, at home monitoring or at emergency monitoring using your device, right?
So the technology can be used whether you're in the hospital, it could be used in patients at home, it could be used in patients climbing Mount Everest. So there's a lot of unique applications and really cool things that I think we can do from a clinical perspective, from a research perspective, and also for people at home who are just interested in monitoring their blood pressure more closely.
What other obstacles do you face when you are developing such a product, which is completely groundbreaking, first of all, and hopefully it has such a big impact that it changes human health towards a little better? What kind of challenges do you face?
I think the biggest challenge for any research or new development is just funding. That's, I think, from day one, been the biggest barrier to making this technology successful, is particularly given the macro environment right now with research funding. It's really difficult to figure out how you're going to continue to move something forward as quickly and as efficiently as possible, but also make sure that the research lab or the company doesn't run out of money. So balancing that and figuring out sort of how much and when and who are probably some of the biggest challenges that we face.
And funding is primarily the challenge right now for you, and hopefully that Hopefully that's solved for bigger things to come eventually. So this is a very specific question, and this is more to do with your thought process, how you approach a problem. And I think it is critical for me to hear from you and the audience. Based on your past experience, whether at NASA, in academia, or the front lines of emergency medicine, three very different environments, how does those experiences influence the way you lead innovation at Esperto Medical? What is that critical that you bring to the table that is very unique? And I would love to hear about that.
Anytime you work in one environment or in one field, you start to understand the problems within that field really well. And so I think where working in a variety of environments, I can look at a problem from different perspectives. So when I look at something as an entrepreneur, and I'm trying to solve a problem, I can also think about it from the lens of a clinician who I'm trying to solve this problem for, or from a perspective of a patient, or from the perspective of a scientific researcher, and how these technologies can benefit all of these different communities. And so I think that's where the experiences that I've had in the different work environments really can be helpful. Is I'm not just looking at it from one specific viewpoint, but I can look at it from the perspective of a lot of different fields and make sure that what we're developing is effective and easy to use for people in a lot of different types of communities and environments.
You are not only understanding a different perspective from a different side, but you really know that because you have been there, and that makes a lot of difference that you bring to the table.
I think if you try to solve a problem for a person, but you've never experienced that problem yourself, you can end up with a solution that might be great from a technology perspective, but maybe it's not comfortable. Maybe it's not easy to use. Maybe when I was talking earlier about the calibration problem, if I have to get out another device, I'm just not going to use it. So having those experiences can be really helpful in making sure that what we're building actually meets the needs of the people who are going to use it.
And if you don't have that experience, that's okay too. Just consult with people who have that experience
absolutely.
early on in the product development. Make sure that those perspectives are really ingrained in the development. So
I'm a clinician. We have talked to a lot of other clinicians to make sure I don't want to develop a device that's only good for me and my use
yeah,
cases.
exactly.
So I think it's really important to get perspectives from others.
So looking into the future, and you are a thought leader in this area, what advances or shifts in diagnostics and remote care do you believe could have the most significant impact on how and where people receive care, perhaps in next 1 year, maybe 2 years, and in 5 years?
So I think we saw a little bit of a shift starting during the pandemic, where traditionally care has been almost always in person. There's been a little bit of telemedicine available in the background, particularly for people working in remote environments. So Antarctica or, something that's really challenging. But we saw this shift where telemedicine has become much more commonplace, even in practices where typically you would see patients in person. I, during the pandemic, was sitting in the ER, but would see patients kind of driving through to get their COVID tests and just screen them and make sure, are these people okay? Should we bring them into the department when they have a positive test? And so with a shift like that, I think it's really enabled telemedicine for a lot of new use cases that make doctors' visits more convenient for patients. Patients who have challenges with mobility or challenges with childcare or challenges at work that prevent them from taking a half a day off or a full day off to get to their doctor's office. And when you go to the doctor's office, there's often a lot of challenges where you have to find parking, you have to walk from the parking structure to the doctor's office. And so that, again, can be really challenging for a lot of patients. So I really see a shift taking place where telemedicine will be more common practice, help improve access for people who have those barriers right now. And I think Esperto can really help with that, because one of the biggest challenges I see with telemedicine is when I look at a patient, sometimes it's hard to tell, is their blood pressure okay? Is their oxygen saturation okay? And so having a device like Esperto's device can help us really answer those questions by creating a communication between the patient at home and the provider and making sure those things like your vital signs are okay. Because if they're not, then an in-person visit is a lot more appropriate. So it can help, again, with some of that screening process and making sure that the right people are getting to the right places at the right time.
I can envision how efficient that was, that people are actually not even getting down from the car. And as a physician, you get to talk to them. You can see so many number of patients, and the patients do not have to waste their time, and you don't have to walk to different rooms to see the patients. So it just efficiency is such enormous and so much scope for us to go in that direction. So that's phenomenal, and I think doing it from home will be another game changer.
I think the primary issue at that time was just contamination. If you have people with a positive COVID test that are okay, do you want them walking past the newborn infants room or, the cancer patient on chemo's room? And so being able to isolate more effectively, I think was really helpful in that particular circumstance. But I think also, to your point and with what we discussed earlier, increasing access, making it easier for people to get care are the really great use cases.
Yeah, I was discussing this with someone, and a patient who has come with a broken leg to go back to the nurse and get the ticket validated, and if they have to walk 50 feet, is a huge task. Like as simple as those things, right? Just getting down, it's a challenge, and if you can solve for those things, it just becomes so much more accessible. For those thinking of launching something bold in healthcare, what lessons do you have learned about building trust, balancing risk, keeping patient outcomes front and center, and also balancing risk, right? It seems like you are more on the adventurous side, which is really good. We need a lot of people like that to take that risk. So how do you balance these things? There are like so many different variables.
Yeah, there's a lot of parts to that question, I feel like. So we want to keep patient safety front and center. I mean, a huge value and a huge driver in developing our technology is improving patient safety, removing an invasive procedure that maybe somebody doesn't need, or providing access to continuous vital sign monitoring that they don't currently have. So I think those are really important ways to look at a problem. Are you improving safety? Are you improving access? Are you creating a new diagnostic or a new way to look at a health problem that didn't exist before to kind of decide, this risk worth it? And with that, you want to talk to the people who are going to use your device or your technology and understand, is this something that they feel like they actually need? Because to your point, having a startup, starting a company, doing new research is really risky. It can certainly be scary at times. And you want to make sure that what you're doing actually makes sense before you take those risks. And so we've been very forthright about the fact that if we feel like the technology is just not cutting it, we're pulling the plug. We're not going to put something onto the market that we feel like isn't going to be effective or isn't going to solve problems appropriately. And so we did that with some of the earlier methods. I think I mentioned earlier on, we'd tried a couple other ways of measuring
Yeah.
blood pressure with ultrasound and decided they weren't good enough. And so we started over from square one. And that can be really scary to say, this thing that I've been working on, that I've done these clinical studies for, isn't good enough. But ultimately, I think as an entrepreneur, you really have to have the capability to look effectively at what you're doing and make sure it makes sense and sort of weigh the risks and benefits with moving that technology forward.
Perfect. So the building trust comes over time, and it is your track record, what you have done before. As you said, you were the one who pulled the plug on something that you have been working on and put significant resources into. But you are the one who said, this may not be the most optimal thing for the patients. And you step back on it and went to square one. Appreciate that. I think in healthcare, I think we have to be that way. There are other places where people push suboptimal products, but in healthcare, we have to be very careful about doing this. It has to, patient safety comes first.
I'm constantly asking myself, would I use this? Would my patients be annoyed by this? Or, is this something they would like? Is this something they would tolerate? And so having, again, that experience has been really valuable in developing a technology, just looking at it from different perspectives and making sure that what we're bringing forward actually makes sense.
Yeah. And the other part is also, as you mentioned multiple times, the ability of physicians to deliver this as well. That is also a big part. Even if it is patients are happy, but the physicians are just unable to deliver it efficiently, then it's not going to work either. So it has to be both. Convenience.
Physicians, nurses, they have to want to pick it up. If they don't want to pick it up, then it's not going to get used.
It's not going to get used. One question before our very final question. If you could offer one piece of advice to aspiring entrepreneurs or future healthcare leaders listening right now, what would it be? Let me take back on that, not just one piece of advice, but the critical factors that has to be there in this changing environment for entrepreneur and healthcare leaders to consider as we go forward into healthcare for next 1 years, 2 years, and 5 years. Just because the environment is changing so much, what is that critical factor they have to consider?
Well, to your point, the environment is extremely challenging right now. And so I think the most important thing that you can have as an entrepreneur is just resilience. You have to be really comfortable hearing no, but you also have to constantly be evaluating risk and understanding, is the risk of moving forward or, making one decision versus another decision worth it in the context of everything else going on. So I think a lot of it comes from you have to be able to pick yourself back up when things don't go quite right and move forward and make sure that you're moving forward in a productive way.
All right. And how do you pick yourself up, Alaina?
That's a great question. I climb mountains, I run. I like to do things that are physical, I think, to kind of move forward. But then also you have to compartmentalize and just move on from, whatever the challenge was, or figure out a plan on what the next steps are.
And thank you very much. Find a healthy habit to pick yourself up, essentially. Sometimes in my early days, maybe I had tended to eat more food, but don't do that. Okay, terrific. A little bit is the key there. I will pick up healthy habits. I do actually. I try to go to the gym a little bit more than I used to. So, and as a final question before we wrap up, Alaina, you will have 90 seconds. You can take more if you want to. If we missed anything with my questions, or if you think that there is something important you want to reiterate, and talk about Esperto more, about the product itself. Basically, the question is yours, the answer is yours, and the stage is yours.
Thank you. It feels, with a timer, I don't know, but I don't think we've really missed anything. I think Esperto was essentially founded so that we can help improve medical diagnostics and vital sign monitoring, kind of whether you're in an urban hospital in the US or a remote island or the surface of Mars. And so we really hope that with this technology, we're able to create sort of a cardiovascular microscope and start to really understand how the cardiovascular system changes throughout the day, throughout weeks, months, years. And with those technologies, potentially even prevent some of that disease from happening in the future. So we're really excited about moving forward and looking forward to hopefully having a device on the market in the next couple of years.
Right. And congratulations on all the development they have already achieved, and best luck on the future developments as well. And Alaina, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.